They dropped out of transit at 0341 shipboard time, and my comms officer had the frequency locked before the last of their drives cooled. I had been awake for 2 hours already. 30,000 years is a long time to wait for a ship, but the archive had given us a 12-day approach window based on the Conclave's own navigational records. Records they had left in the toxin seed canisters, as it happened, presumably because they never imagined anyone would still be alive to read them. My crew had the intercept plotted before the Veth Herald fleet finished its deceleration burn. We were already in position, hanging at 61 kilometers above the equatorial approach corridor, the Andarath's 4.2 kilometers of hull-oriented broadside to their entry vector, all running lights on, and every external array lit. I wanted them to see us clearly. Below the deck glass, the Caveth shelf stretched from one horizon to the other. Even at altitude, the city's upper tier was close enough that I could make out the sweep of the transit arches crossing the upper atmosphere, their suspension pylons rising another 8 kilometers above us. The morning light was coming up over the Eastern Ocean, and it caught the upper tier in gold, and the shelf looked like what it was. 400 million people living in a structure that had taken 11,000 years to finish. I had grown up in the lower shelf. I had eaten breakfast that morning in the same district where my grandmother had been born, which was the sort of thing that felt ordinary when you lived it, and extraordinary when you thought about it for more than a moment. I stopped thinking about it. The Veth Herald fleet was crossing the outer marker. There were 11 ships. I had expected more, to be honest. 11 was a ceremonial number for the Conclave, one for each of their prophet castes, and it told me something useful. They had come to deliver a verdict, not to fight. They were here because 30,000 years ago, they had issued an extinction ultimatum to a pre-spaceflight civilization on a small planet, seeded that planet's biosphere with a slow-collapse biological agent, and then departed with every expectation that the matter was settled. They had come back to file the claim on an empty world. 11 ships was appropriate for a ceremony. For a conquest already concluded by time and biology, 11 ships was more than enough. My flag comms officer, Lieutenant Vasari, looked up from her board. "They're broadcasting, Admiral. The archive frequency. Pre-recorded. Put it on." The voice was a layered thing, multiple registers speaking in unison. The Conclave's formal announcement cadence, which we had been able to reconstruct from the canister's own encoded preambles. 30,000 years had apparently not changed their ceremonial language in any significant way. The translation came through in clean, flat standard beneath it. By the authority of the Veth Conclave, first and final voice of the ordered succession, this world is hereby claimed under the terms of the dissolution ultimatum, issued in the 407th year of the Conclave's reckoning. The biological succession agent has had sufficient time to complete its work. This world is declared void of its prior claimants. Transfer of stewardship begins upon confirmation of compliance. There was a pause in the recording. Then, if any remnant population persists in violation of the dissolution ultimatum's terms, please respond on this frequency. Lieutenant Vasari looked at me. There was a very particular expression on her face that I had come to recognize over 6 years of service together. It was the expression she wore when something was so far outside normal operating parameters that the only available response was a kind of professional serenity. "Respond," I said. "Voice only, my channel." She opened the line. "Veth Conclave Herald Fleet," I said. "This is Admiral Cale Morrow, commanding the Andarath, Earth Planetary Defense Carrier, First Fleet. You are currently in restricted approach space. Please halt your deceleration and hold at your present position while we process your request. You will have a formal reply shortly." I closed the channel. Vasari was quiet for a moment. "Do you want me to pull up the archive document, sir?" "It's already on my secondary screen," I said. "Has been for a week." She almost smiled. "Of course it has." The archive document was 30,000 years old and 8 pages long, in the original Veth notation, which our Xenolinguistics division had spent about 4 centuries decoding, before the rest of the work got interesting. Page 1 was the ultimatum itself. Formal, procedural, the language of a civilization that had done this many times before, by the authority of the Veth Conclave and so on. Pages 2 through 4 were the technical specifications of the dissolution agent, its molecular structure, its replication mechanism, its projected cascade timeline. The Conclave had apparently included this as a formality, the way a contractor leaves a copy of the building plans with the municipality. The assumption was that no one who received it would be in any position to read it. Page 5 was where it got interesting, because page 5 was where one of our early xenobiologists, a woman named Desta Arulia, working out of a research station on what was then the coast of a continent that no longer had that particular coastline, had begun her annotations. Her handwriting was in the margins of a scan of a ceramic transcription of the original document, and her annotations were written in a language that was itself 30,000 years dead, but we had those records too. The annotation on page 5, next to the molecular diagram of the dissolution agent's replication key, read simply, "I think I can interrupt this here." She had been right. It had taken her research group 11 years. It had taken the next generation's research group another 40 to develop a planetary-scale countermeasure. By the time the shelf's first transit arch was under construction, the dissolution agent had been entirely inert in Earth's biosphere for more than 26,000 years. The remaining pages of the archive document were dense with annotations in dozens of hands across dozens of centuries. Biologists, engineers, planetary architects, military planners, linguists, archivists. The last annotation had been added 14 years ago by a graduate student in xenodiplomacy, who was now one of my ship's senior briefing officers. Her note on the final page was 3 words, "See attached reply." The attached reply was 940 pages long. The Conclave's Herald fleet had held position for 16 minutes when their first voice came on the channel live. I had been expecting this. 16 minutes was about how long it would take a crew expecting to observe a dead world to register that the dead world had a 4-kilometer warship sitting in its upper atmosphere with all lights on, that the atmosphere beneath said warship contained a city structure of evident continental scale, and that the warship had already responded to their broadcast in their own language. The first voice was different in texture from the recorded announcement, slower, the layered registers slightly out of alignment with each other in a way that the translation software flagged as indicative of cognitive distress. Our xenopsych team had spent a great deal of time modeling what a conclave first voice would sound like when its foundational operational assumptions were being revised against its will. They had been, as it turned out, quite accurate. "Planetary surface," the first voice said. "We are receiving anomalous readings. Please clarify the nature of the construction visible on the planetary surface and in the upper atmosphere, and the nature of the vessel currently maintaining position in the approach corridor." "Admiral?" Vasari said. "I heard it." I opened my channel again. "First voice," I said. "The vessel in the approach corridor is the Andarath. As I stated, the construction on the planetary surface is the city of Veth Shelf, established approximately 11,000 years ago, and currently home to 412 million residents. There are 7 additional structures of comparable scale on the planetary surface, and a further 12 in orbital and near-orbital positions. I am transmitting a surface survey package now, so that your navigation team can update their charts. Regarding the anomalous atmospheric readings, Earth's biosphere has been fully recovered and functioning normally for approximately 26,000 years. You may want to update your projections on the dissolution agent's efficacy." I paused. Then, "We have prepared a formal response to your dissolution ultimatum. I am transmitting it on your document frequency now. It is 940 pages. I would suggest that your first voice review pages 1 through 12 first, as they include an executive summary. The remainder is technical appendix." I closed the channel and nodded to Vasari, who opened the archive relay. The Conclave's Herald fleet was quiet for a long time. I stood at the deck glass and looked at the Veth shelf in the morning light, and tried to think of something I could compare this moment to. I had been present for 3 first contact events in my career, 2 asteroid interdictions, and 1 engagement with the Reuven colonial separatists that I was still not cleared to discuss in most company. None of those had felt quite like this. Those had been events where the outcome was uncertain. This one had been certain for 30,000 years. We were simply, at last, informing the other party. On my secondary screen, the document transmission logged its progress. Page 12, page 40, page 200. The first voice came back on at page 316. "This, annotation," it said, and then stopped. The cognitive distress flag in the translation software was now running at a level our xenopsych team had labeled with characteristic understatement, as elevated. The annotation on the dissolution agent's replication sequence. This was made, when? Approximately 29,940 years ago, I said, roughly 60 years after your fleet departed. The researcher's name was Desta Arulia. She is referenced in the bibliography on page 807, if you want the full citation. Another silence. The Conclave's navigational drives, I noticed on my sensor display, had gone completely cold. They were not moving. The biological succession process was... It was a certainty, the first voice said. The registers were significantly more misaligned now. The cascade timeline was well documented, I said. You left us excellent technical specifications. That was very helpful. I had been advised by the diplomatic briefing team not to say that last part. I said it anyway. 30,000 years earns a certain latitude. The reply to the dissolution ultimatum included, in its technical appendices, a complete molecular analysis of the succession agent, a century-by-century record of its decline in the planetary biosphere, a full reconstruction of the Conclave's delivery mechanism, the names and institutional affiliations of every researcher who had worked on the countermeasure project over the 11-year development period, and a detailed accounting of every city, orbital station, and deep space installation that humanity had built during the 30,000 years the Conclave had expected us to be quietly dying. Page 940 was a single page. It contained no technical data. It read, in the Conclave's own formal notation, rendered by our Xenolinguistics division with considerable care for accuracy, the people of Earth acknowledge receipt of your dissolution ultimatum. We have reviewed its terms. We do not accept them. We consider this matter closed. The Veth Herald fleet held position for a further 6 hours. I had the Andarath maintain its position as well, broadside to their approach vector, all lights on. There was no hostility in it. I simply saw no reason to move. At 10:27 shipboard time, the first voice transmitted a brief formal message on the document frequency. Our Xenolinguistics team processed it in under an hour. It read, the Veth Conclave acknowledges receipt of Earth's reply to the dissolution ultimatum. The Conclave considers this matter closed. At 11:04, the 11 ships lit their transit drives. At 11:19, they were gone. I stood at the deck glass for a while after that, watching the morning work its way across the upper tier of the Caveth shelf. The transit arches caught the light differently as the sun moved, and the color on the upper tier shifted through a range that the architects had apparently planned for and that I had never noticed before, because I had never had reason to stand at this particular window, at this particular hour, and simply look. Below me, 412 million people were beginning their day in a city built over 11,000 years, on a world that an ancient civilization had decided, 30,000 years ago, was finished. Desta Arulia had written, I think I can interrupt this here, and she had been right, and 30,000 years of people had carried that forward, without dropping it. And now it was 1104 in the morning, and the Veth Conclave had just filed their paperwork and gone home. I thought that was probably enough.